And of course the beach house should go to me. Ava's sharp voice cut through the murmurs filling the room. After all, I'm the eldest. My blood turned to ice in my veins as I listened to my stepdaughter's words. We were gathered for Ethan's wake, and before his body was even cold, his children from his first marriage were already squabbling over his assets like hungry vultures. Leo nodded vigorously. For sure, the old man would have wanted us to have it. All those summers we spent out there as kids. Nora shifted uncomfortably but said nothing as Ava continued. This entire situation is just obscene. How could he leave everything to that woman? She jerked her head in my direction, blind hatred glinting in her eyes. I felt Derek's firm hand on my arm, grounding me. Ethan's oldest friend and our family lawyer leaned in. Don't listen to them, Mira. This is just the grief and greed talking. But it didn't feel that way to me. Not with the venom in Ava's voice as she spat. She was nothing more than a glorified nurse he took pity on after his divorce. We're his real family. The snakes had slithered out while I was still reeling from Ethan's death. Just 2 weeks ago, he had been hale and hearty, regaling our son Caleb with plans for his 13th birthday trip. Now he was gone, struck down by a heart attack, sudden and cruel, and his offspring from his first marriage were wasting no time asserting their birthright. Caleb tugged at my sleeve, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Poor boy didn't understand the depths of his siblings' depravity. Sweet, sensitive Caleb, who had adored his father with every fiber of his being, while they had been poisoned by greed. Ava sneered at me again, and I stiffened, gripping Caleb's hand tightly. How dare these ingrates dishonor Ethan's memory mere days after his passing? He had taken care of them, doted on them, rebuilt his relationship with them after the divorce, despite their mother's objections. And this was how they repaid him, by lusting after his estate before he was even laid to rest. A familiar voice rang out, stern but controlled. That's enough. Derek had stepped forward, shoulders squared. Out of respect for Ethan, I must ask that you keep such discussions private for now. Give the man a goddamn chance to be laid to rest properly before you start squabbling like this. For a beat, a tense hush fell over the room. Then Leo opened his mouth, that perpetual sneer on his lips. But Derek raised his hand, a calming gesture but one that brokered no arguments. I'll be reaching out soon to all of you regarding dispersal of assets. But not today. We're here to mourn Ethan and celebrate his life, not indulge petty monetary disagreements. Are we clear? Ava looked murderous, but she gave a terse nod. Crystal. She still, then turned on her heel and stormed out, Leo and Nora trailing behind. In their wake, a fragile silence shattered only by Caleb's hiccuping sobs. I pulled my son close, stroking his hair as my own tears flowed. Little did those vultures know, but Ethan had one final ace up his sleeve. As I clutched his last letter to me, written in shaky but determined strokes, I knew that he would have his justice. The game was just beginning. Sleep eluded me that night as Ethan's words burned in my mind. My dearest Mira, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened. I rolled onto my side, clutching the crumpled sheets as the memory washed over me in vivid detail. It was just last week that I had discovered the thin manila envelope tucked in Ethan's desk drawer, my name scrawled across it in his familiar handwriting. At first I had shrugged it off, assuming it was related to another of his business matters. But then I spotted the date, just 3 days before his fatal heart attack. My hands had trembled as I sliced through the envelope's flap. 5 neatly folded sheets fluttered out, each bearing a number, 1 through 5. Ethan's meticulous nature shone through even here, it seemed. As I unfurled the first page, the bottom dropped out of my stomach. It was a letter explicitly intended for me to read after he was gone. An icy chill gripped me as I started to read, barely paying attention to Caleb's playing in the next room. My dearest Mira, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened and I am no longer with you. My heart thudded as I inched forward. When we married 11 years ago, you became my true partner in every sense of the word. You have been the calm in my storm, the night to my day, the unshakable foundation that kept me grounded even as I built my empire. I remembered my shock, my disbelief at his premonitions, his assumptions that he would be torn from me so abruptly. Yet as the cruel fates would have it, his instincts proved correct. Just 3 days after penning this letter, he suffered a massive coronary during one of his morning meetings. The words blurred on the page as my vision swam with tears. This couldn't be the end. Not like this. Not after everything we had built together. Not after the ups and downs, the battles and battles won. Ethan had been my soulmate, my partner in crime. How could he be so cruelly ripped away? I continued reading, my chest tightening with every line. I know without a doubt that Ava, Leo, and Nora will come after my assets like starving wolves the moment I'm gone. I could practically hear his wry chuckle through the ink. They have revealed their true greedy, grasping natures to me, time and again. And while I have provided for them materially, I cannot allow them to descend like locusts, devouring every last flower in their path. My jaw clenched as I recalled the unseemly scene at the wake, those three circling like vultures, squabbling over Ethan's properties before he was even in the ground, just as he had predicted right here in these letters. Which is why, my love, you must fight them. The letter's tone intensified, the scrawled handwriting pressing furiously into the paper. You must fight to keep them from destroying the legacies we built, not just the business empire, but the future and security we crafted for Caleb. I caught my breath at the mention of our son's name. They cannot be allowed to sully his inheritance, his future, with their rapacious greed and toxic avarice. The words hung there, emphatic and absolute, a call to battle, one which Ethan knew would come even from beyond the grave. I remembered looking up from the letter, a steely resolve settling in my heart. My wonderful husband, he had been willing to take on this fight himself, against his own flesh and blood, but fate had intervened, leaving it to me to carry the torch. As I read on through the night, the path became clear. Ethan's instructions outlined the first salvo, the opening moves in what would surely be a high-stakes war, one which would determine not just the fate of my family's future, but justice itself. Tell Derek I've left everything in readiness, the letter closed. He'll know exactly what path we must take. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of responsibility envelop me, but also the fortifying embrace of Ethan's trust. This was his wish, his final act to protect those he truly loved, and I would be damned if I'd fail him. Gripping the letter tightly, I rose and strode into Caleb's room. He started at my entrance, but I shushed him gently. "Don't worry, my sweet boy," I murmured, stroking his hair. "Your father has given us instructions, and I'll make sure we carry them out to the letter." Caleb opened his mouth, questions swimming in his eyes, but I just smiled, squaring my shoulders. It's time we fight to protect our future. My hands trembled ever so slightly as I unfolded the second letter, those now familiar looping scrawls tantalizing me with their secrets. Despite the cold pit of dread that had taken up residence in my stomach, a frisson of anticipation coursed through me. What revelations awaited within these pages? What weapons had my brilliant husband prepared to battle his monstrous spawn? Caleb watched me intently, his wide eyes missing nothing. The poor boy had been rendered so quiet, so somber by the events of the past weeks, it pained me to see his usual sunny exuberance dimmed, but I forced a reassuring smile for his sake. "Your father always did have a flair for the dramatic." I winked conspiratorially. "Let's see what he's cooked up for us this time." The first few lines plunged into Ethan's signature mix of straightforward instruction and wry observation. "You've always been my most capable partner in all endeavors, my love, so I know I can trust you to handle this situation with utmost discretion and resolve." My eyes narrowed as I continued reading. The first step, it seemed, involved a series of carefully coded file names and instructions to access a secure server that Ethan had created unbeknownst to anyone else. Ever the forward planner, my brilliant husband, it seemed this was his meticulously prepared battleground from beyond the grave. After 15 tense minutes spent following the digital trail of coded breadcrumbs, a vast encrypted database unfurled before me, organized into a series of ominously named folders. Avarsk SB, Leo HBGS, Norask ML. I frowned, sharing a sidelong glance with Derek, who simply shrugged. The old fox was inscrutable as ever. Slowly, I began opening the files, each one decrypting to reveal a staggering array of documentation. Financial statements, third-party audits, private communications, even sealed legal records. What the? I felt the blood drain from my face. Those ingrates, those grasping amoral snakes. The files painted a lurid portrait of untold avarice and deception spanning decades. From Nora's carefully hidden money laundering schemes to Leo's gambling indiscretions that would make a Las Vegas pit boss blush, to Ava's flagrant abuse of corporate resources and funds for her personal gain, no ethical line had gone uncrossed. When my eyes finally regained focus, I realized I was gripping Derek's arm in a white-knuckle grip, the muscles in my jaw practically grinding from clenched rage. How dare they? How dare those monstrous, thankless leeches spend years deceiving and stealing from the very father who had nursed them back into his good graces, after his divorce from their snake of a mother? Those... I was practically spitting, struggling for words to encapsulate the searing fury searing through me. Caleb shrank back, alarmed by the inferno that must have been blazing in my eyes. How could they do this? What kind of vile, soulless creatures could inflict such harm on their own family who gave them everything? Derek's face was grave, his voice solemn. Ethan wanted you to know the truth, Mira, to see exactly who and what you're dealing with. I'll kill them. The words burst forth before I could stop them, guttural and vicious. Those... My mouth twisted in revulsion, the depths of their betrayal playing out in lurid detail before my mind's eye. Their smug smiles at the wake, their blithe piggish privilege as they plotted to carve apart their own father's estate without an ounce of shame. A crimson haze began creeping across my vision as memories of their past transgressions compounded into an unstoppable tsunami. The lies, the selfishness, the flagrant using and abusing of Ethan's goodwill at every turn. Derek's voice was a lifeline dragging me back from the abyss. This is why he made that plan, Mira. This is what we're fighting. Slowly, the fog receded, my senses reorienting around that single-minded focus of determination. Yes, Ethan had seen this all coming. He knew exactly what vicious brood of vipers he had brought into this world, their fangs dripping with venom the instant he succumbed. That was why he had made preparations, why he entrusted his beloved wife with the tools to stand tall and fight for the family's true legacy. With trembling hands, I gathered the documents, weapons for the battle to come. Cold hatred flooded my veins as images of their smug, venomous faces burned in my mind. "All right, you grasping bastards," I growled, squaring my shoulders. "Let's go to war." The sleek lines of my cherry-red Mercedes ate up the road as I sped through the rain-slicked streets, the world outside blurring into a kaleidoscope of neon and shadow. In the passenger seat, Derek's reflection glared back at me in the windshield, his jaw set in a grim line. "You're sure about this?" The question cut through the tense silence. I didn't miss a beat. Absolutely. My knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. It's time they answered for their depraved actions. In the rearview mirror, I could see Caleb's wide eyes peeking over the top of Ethan's stack of files cradled in his lap, the damning evidence of his deceitful siblings' myriad sins. The poor boy had been shocked into numbed silence upon seeing the extent of their treachery. Not that I could blame him. This had to end here and now. There would be no more poison seeping from that festering wound, no more degradation of the family legacy that Ethan had poured his life into upholding. If his own flesh and blood lacked the honor and ethics to protect it, then I would stand in the breach and do what needed to be done. We pulled up to the ornate law offices, all carved mahogany and polished brass, in a classic display of old money decadence. Ava's vehicle was already in its typical spot. Of course, the leech would have arrived early to start spinning her vile machinations. The second my heels hit the marble floor, her shrill tones assaulted my ears. "This is utterly preposterous." She stabbed a filed nail in Derek's direction as Leo and Nora ringed her like sullen bodyguards. "How dare you even entertain this insipid notion that our inheritance could possibly be impacted? I won't have it." Derek cleared his throat. "Your father's wishes were quite clear in his most recent will and estate documents. His instructions were—" "His instructions?" Ava's nostrils flared with undisguised rage. How convenient that he left instructions that so transparently favor his little boy toy over his own children. My grip tightened on Caleb's hand until my knuckles turned white. That classless harpy, how dare she slander Ethan's choices with her petty, ignorant jealousy? Still, I kept my expression neutral as I stepped forward, the binders of evidence clutched like deadly weapons. There's something you should all see before we continue. I pitched my voice in a deadly calm tone. Some information that has recently come to light regarding all of your activities. Ava opened her mouth, eyes glittering with malice. But Leo beat her to the punch with that familiar snide bark of laughter. Oh, here we go with the histrionics. What's in those, huh? More of your little crocodile tears act to try and guilt us into money laundering. My words detonated like a bomb in the middle of their smug tirade, rendering them momentarily stunned into silence. I pressed on, keeping my voice even and measured. Embezzlement, tax evasion, fraud on massive scales totaling in the tens of millions over the past 2 decades. I held up the binders, letting them take in the sheer volume of evidence collected there. For all of it meticulously documented in these files, complete with third-party audits and legal documentation to back it up. An uneasy tension crept over their faces as a hush descended. I could see the gears churning as they grappled to process this sudden upending of the playing field. Then Leo spoke again, a desperate edge creeping into his mocking chuckle. Those are preposterous allegations with no basis in fact, I'm sure. Just more pathetic lies and fabrications from this manipulative. They're all true. The softly spoken declaration lanced through the room with shocking potency, drawing every eye to Derek. He met their incredulous stares with an implacable mask. Every single item in those files is true, documented, verified truth that can be substantiated in any court of law. He folded his hands calmly. Your father was well aware of your indiscretions over the years. He simply chose not to pursue them until his passing, at which point he ensured this information would be leveraged accordingly. The snakes were squirming now, beneath the blinding light of truth being shone into their squalid little burrow, faces paling and contorting with rage. But Ava still rallied with a last snarling burst of wounded entitlement. You liar! You pathetic old vulture, making up stories to try and steal what's rightfully ours. She wheeled on me, eyes wild, and you conniving little whore, always hanging on to father's coattails, thinking you could just take what belonged to his real family. I won't let you. I won't. Enough. Derek's tone brooked no argument. His own fury telegraphed in the flinty glare he leveled at the petulant heiress. When he spoke again, each word dripped with icy venom. You 3 have proven yourselves not only grasping ingrates, but hardened criminals of the worst order who manipulated and stole from your own father. With any luck, you'll end up behind bars for the myriad charges that will be filed once this evidence sees the light of day. In that moment, the world seemed to pivot on its axis, the balance of power shifting in an instant. The snakes had overplayed their hands for the final time, and now they had nowhere left to slither or strike. An eerie silence reigned in the aftermath as their faces crumbled into sickly parodies of outrage and horror. I almost pitied them in that instant, so naked and pathetic were their shattered delusions. Almost. Looping my arm through Caleb's, I steered him back towards the exit, Derek falling in beside us. A twisted smile tugged at the corners of my mouth as I spared one final glance over my shoulder. In the end, a child's greatest heartbreak is the realization that this is darkness that they were born into. Then we were gone, leaving them to their despair and just desserts. The game had changed, and the players were going to learn just how thoroughly. The familiar hush of the plush study enveloped me as I sank into the supple leather armchair. How many times had I sat here sipping aged scotch while Ethan regaled me with tales of his latest business exploits? This room had been his sanctum, his inner circle where only those closest to him were permitted entry. Now it was the war room. Derek set down a tray laden with file folders and sheaves of paper, his craggy face drawn into pensive lines. We're making progress on multiple fronts, but there are still some concerning developments brewing. I arched an eyebrow, gesturing for him to continue as Caleb curled up on the divan, listlessly stabbing at his tablet. The poor boy had been avoiding me lately, no doubt overwhelmed by the dark realities being unearthed about his own family. Another consequence of those snakes' poison to contend with. Ava's been working the media circuits, spinning her narrative about being unfairly persecuted and trying to assassinate your character. A muscle ticked in Derek's jaw. He'd never been able to mask his disdain for Ethan's eldest. Rage flickered through me, though I fought to keep my expression impassive. Of course the wretch would stoop to such depths in her desperation, spreading salacious lies in a bid to sway the inevitable court of public opinion that would weigh in once this all went public. Still, I allowed myself a small predatory smile. If public sentiment is what she wants to play for, we'll gladly oblige her. Derek's eyebrows rose quizzically, even as understanding glinted in his eyes. With a few deft keystrokes, I activated the Media Blitz protocol Ethan had shown me, setting a vast factory of bloggers, pundits, and social media influencers into motion. Within minutes, the first damaging leaks began sprinkling across the internet, tantalizing whiffs of the snake's crimes, hitting just the right marks to whet appetites. "There," I stated with grim satisfaction. "Let's see how well her crocodile tears hold up against the documented facts of her family's misdeeds." Information was power, and Ethan had stockpiled enough ammunition for the mother of all wars on this front. Thanks to his paranoid foresight and meticulous records, any attempts at disinformation or suppression would prove futile against the tidal wave about to crash down upon Ava and her cohorts. Turning back to the files, I rifled through them with renewed vigor. "What else do we have? There's no such thing as too much leverage." Derek nodded, expression hardening. "I've also uncovered some disturbing activity around Ethan's companies that points to potential corporate sabotage attempts from our adversaries." My head snapped up. "Explain." "A number of concerning personnel moves and expenditure discrepancies at some of the subsidiary branches." Derek extracted a folder, handing it to me. "Here are the accounting audits. It looks like funds are being diverted into some shadowy slush areas, likely to fuel further disruptions." "Those wretched snakes," I hissed, scanning the documents with mounting disbelief and rage. Not content with robbing their own father and betraying his legacy, now they want to burn it all down, too. Of course they would stoop to such reprehensible depths. Their venomous greed and bitterness knew no bounds. Principles be damned. If they couldn't have Ethan's empire for themselves, they were determined to scorch the earth and salt the remains. Well, not on my watch. The phone was to my ear before conscious thought, muscle memory taking over as I rapidly punched in a coded sequence. When the line picked up, I didn't waste time with preamble. "Wade, it's Mira. We have a situation brewing. Possible infiltrators trying to compromise our holdings." I laid out the details in crisp, precise phrases, feeling a feral sort of satisfaction at the clipped, flinty responses from the other end. Ethan's head of corporate security had always been one of the family's staunchest loyalists and a consummate professional when it came to neutralizing threats. Derek watched me with an approving nod as I terminated the call, already mapping out our next actions. We'd hit them from every angle, whether slithering snakes or cunning serpents, starting with locking down anything they tried to sink their greedy fangs into. A muffled gasp drew my attention across the room, where Caleb sat frozen, hand over his mouth and eyes wide with shock. Before I could react, his whispered words dropped like a lead weight. "Mom. The house." The security alert klaxon had already begun blaring by the time my feet hit the polished marble foyer downstairs. In one blistering glance through the reinforced windows, the full extent of the Viper's strike revealed itself. Glass shattered, gates torn open, windows smashed. An entire tactical team of masked intruders storming the premises, fanning out with cold precision. And at their core, striding with a victorious sneer, leading the charge, Ava. My heart stopped. No, not my home, not my sanctuary. My fists clenched in rage even as my mind whirred with sickening realization. The sudden activity around Ethan's assets. It had all been a feint, a diversion to draw our scrutiny away while the real play unfolded on our own doorstep. They were going for the jugular and hitting where it would hurt most. Derek exploded from the study, slamming his fist against the security lockdown switch as Wade's team began engaging the invaders. "We're cut off outside! They've trapped us inside!" My world narrowed to a single point of blazing fury as Ava's triumphant laughter rang out, muffled through the ballistic glass yet still scraping like nails. "Did you really think it would be that easy, you sanctimonious bitch?" She leveled the barrel of her rifle directly at me with a feral grin. "Time to burn it all down, starting with you." Checkmate, it seemed. The first thunderous volley of fire impacted against the windows as I pulled Caleb flush against me. So this was how it would end then, betrayed and outmaneuvered by those we should have been able to trust most. I met Derek's stricken gaze over Caleb's bowed head with a look of grim determination. No, not the end. The counterattack was just beginning. The muzzle flashes from Ava's assault rifle seemed to stretch into lurid slow motion, each round hammering against the reinforced windows in percussive bursts. Shards of shattered glass exploded inward, stinging my exposed skin as I shielded Caleb with my body. My mind raced even as fear clenched my gut. How could it have come to this? Gunfire and blood mere feet from where my darling Ethan used to read bedtime stories to our son. This home we had built together, now befouled by the very snakes who worshipped at the altar of their own greed. Safe room. Derek's shout cut through the cacophony as he hauled Caleb and I towards the hidden panic bunker. My mind flashed to the countless drills we had practiced even as the floorboards gave way beneath our feet, swallowing us into the fortified bolt hole. My world shrank to bare concrete walls and the acrid smell of explosives residue as Derek sealed the entrance behind us. Caleb was shaking violently, pupils dilated with shock as he clung to me. My own heart hammered painfully, but I forced my features into a mask of calm resolution. "Shh! It's okay, my sweet boy," I murmured, stroking his hair as I once did when he suffered night terrors. "We're safe in here. Nothing can hurt us." A wry snort from the corner drew my attention to where Wade emerged from the shadows, eyes hard. "Yeah, for now, maybe. But those psychopaths aren't going to give up so easily." Derek shot him a warning glare, even as he ushered Caleb and me towards the bank of reinforced monitors lining one wall. My breath caught in my throat at the images playing out. A full-scale assault in progress, dozens of masked gunmen ravaging our home under Ava's crazed direction. The footage cut dizzyingly between the sweeping security cameras dotting the premises. A fresh wave of nausea rolled through me at the devastation, at the wanton disregard for anything other than their rapacious spite. Furniture smashed, paintings shredded, decades of treasured memories simply ruined in an instant, all at the hands of the very monsters I once called family. Ava appeared again on one monitor, face twisted into a garish leer as she tossed a priceless antique vase through a set of French doors. "Come out! Come out!" she taunted in a saccharine sing-song, pivoting her rifle in slow arcs. "Don't you want to surrender and make this nice and easy?" I felt bile rise in my throat even as my grief and shock calcified into blistering rage. Easy? There would be nothing nice or easy about the reckoning to come, not after this unforgivable transgression, not after the bloodshed they had wrought upon hallowed ground. On another screen, Leo and Nora prowled through Ethan's study, gleefully upending bookshelves and smashing heirlooms beneath the butts of their rifles. An arc of crimson fury lashed across my vision at the wanton defilement of my beloved husband's inner sanctum. How dare they? How dare those mongrels defile what had been so sacred, so integral to the man they once claimed to love? We need to hit them back. The words dropped like granite between clenched teeth, and we need to hit them hard. Derek shifted, the worry lines etched deeper than I'd ever seen them. We're outnumbered and outgunned here, Mira. A direct confrontation would be suicide. My hands balled into white-knuckled fists, quivering with the effort of restraint. Easy for him to say, from the safety of our bolt hole, while that scourge continued to pillage and defile with impunity. Didn't he understand that there were some sins that could never be forgiven, some stains that could never be washed clean? I rounded on Wade, desperation clawing at the edges of my resolve. Tell me you have something, some way to strike back at them, to make them pay for what they've done. The grim-faced commando regarded me steadily for a long moment before giving a slow nod. We always plan for the worst contingencies. His finger stabbed a control, and a fresh bank of monitors flickered to life, displaying a dizzying array of maps, deployment patterns, weapon schematics, and other technical details. The way I see it, we've got two main options. Either go loud with stun grenades and tactical breach teams, or slip in quieter from the maintenance tunnels and hit 'em where they sleep. My jaw clenched as I studied the contingencies. Both were risky, both carried the potential for deadly escalation if things went sideways. But after what I just witnessed, after the depraved disregard for any shred of human decency, such delicacy seemed quaint. "Do it," I growled, feeling as if I were shedding the last vestiges of civilized constraint. "Hit them with everything we've got. Make the snakes. Burn them down if you have to. I don't care anymore." Wade's obsidian gaze remained steady even as a feral grin slowly crept across his features. "Yes, ma'am." 10 minutes later, a precisely synchronized symphony of thunder shook the compound. Chaotic screams and the hair-raising concussions of stun grenades battered the audio pickups. I watched in cold silence as Ava shrieked and clawed at her blinded eyes, fumbling for her weapon as the first assault teams descended, only to be met head-on by the grim-faced heavy weapons squads emerging from the tunnels, firepower barking in controlled metronomic bursts. Caleb recoiled in horror, ears ringing from the proximity blasts and eyes clamped shut as the nightmare played out before us. But I simply drank in every millisecond of unfolding carnage, allowing the numbing ice of vengeance to seep into my marrow. They had awoken a nest of hornets, and the stinging reprisal would be exquisite. My mouth curved ever so slightly as the tear gas canisters detonated, engulfing Ava in choking white clouds as her shrieks devolved into wet, gurgling sobs. Surrender? My voice was a low rasp, barely audible over the din of combat. Not a chance. The words kindled like sparks before roaring into an unstoppable inferno of heedless indignation. "You started a war tonight, and I'm going to make thrice damned sure you burn." The courtroom galleries were packed to the rafters, a veritable sea of suits and sharp angles punctuated by the intermittent clicks of cameras from the media pit. A low buzz of anticipation thrummed through the air, sparking with unseen currents of electricity as we awaited the arrival of the presiding judge. Beside me, Derek's expression was carved from granite, giving away none of the exhaustion or strain that etched his features after months of endless motions and legal wrangling. This would be the culmination, the deciding salvo in our battle to hold those treacherous vipers accountable not just for their sordid crimes, but for the very souls they had bartered away to the demons of greed and entitlement. When the bailiff finally announced the judge's entrance, a hush blanketed the room, allowing every muted footstep and rustling whisper to resonate obscenely. I inhaled deeply, steeling myself against the rising tide of anger and disgust that threatened to overwhelm me as Ava, Leo, and Nora were led in, still defiant in the face of their impending judgment. My nails dug crescents into my palms as I drank in their appearances. Ava's once haughty mask reduced to a twisted caricature of barely contained rage, Leo's perpetual sneer now tinged with naked fear, and Nora. Poor, pathetic Nora, whose cowardice and moral vacancy had condemned her to this fate alongside her monstrous siblings. They huddled together, shooting venomous glares and muttered asides like truculent children, even as their legions of millionaire attorneys fussed and preened. Pathetic, simply pathetic, the lot of them. This twisted family, if it could even be called that, had sown the whirlwind, and now they would reap the harvest of their unforgivable transgressions. I refused to allow even a glimmer of pity to take root in my heart, not after the blood spilled and atrocities committed in their death throes. No, if anything, they should count themselves fortunate to still be breathing after that fateful night. As the preliminary matters droned on in that somnolent legalese, my mind replayed the vivid images seared into its darkest recesses. The muzzle flashes bathing Ava's contorted mask in demonic shades as the opening salvo rained down. Leo's wretched screams as the fast-rope teams punched through the shattered windows in a hail of debris. Nora recoiling with very real terror as the piano wire traps shredded her would-be cover into splinters. By the time our forces had arrived, the courtyard resembled a bombed-out war zone, furniture and fixtures smashed and blasted into matchwood, elaborate frescoes obliterated by insensate gunfire, centuries-old heirlooms reduced to ash and echoes. My own home, our sanctuary, butchered on the twisted altar of their petty vindictiveness and depraved rapacity. Every ounce of mercy, of restraint, that may have dwelled within me withered away in those harrowing hours as the assault unfolded. Whatever pitiful dregs of family allegiance still lingered shriveled up and died amidst the maelstrom of hatred and revulsion that engulfed me. And when at last that final, glorious moment arrived, Ava and her cohorts disarmed, bloodied, forced to their knees amidst the smoldering ruins of their doomed siege. I knew there could be no forgiveness, not for them and the unforgivable evil they had unleashed. "Please," Nora's trembling plea, barely audible, cut through the ringing in my ears as powerfully as any gunshot. "Mira, please, it wasn't supposed to go this far," as if summoning the very last dregs of her moral cowardice could somehow undo the atrocities, the wanton devastation surrounding us. My gut twisted with reviled contempt. Ava, ever the irredeemable monster, spat a curse rebuke that withered on her bloodied lips even as I strode forward, the barrel of my sidearm leveled with uncompromising precision. "Don't." The word lashed out with all the blistering finality of a gunshot. "You don't get to beg." My voice was low, laced with a vitriol so pure and distilled that it seemed to sear the very air. "You don't get to plead or whimper or cry now after everything you've done." Despite the protests of the surrounding forces, I continued my advance until I stood mere feet from my quarry, staring down into those sunken pits of hatred and shame they dared call eyes. Only then, basking in the weight of their impotent fury, did I allow my mouth to crease into the slightest of vindicated sneers. "Your actions forfeited any such leniency the moment you decided to sacrifice everything, your names, your legacies, your very souls, on the pyre of your greed." The muzzle loomed inexorably, daring them to protest further. Ava and Leo were actually quailing now, some dim flicker of self-preservation kindling behind their masks of bravado, while Nora simply crumbled, fat tears streaking down her blotched cheeks. So it would be then. They could gnash and howl at their ill fortunes, lash out like the beasts they had revealed themselves to be. But in the end, we would have the last, most decisive word. My finger tightened fractionally on the trigger, as decades of insults, betrayals, and unspeakable acts of depravity washed over me, prepping me for the coup de grace, only to be halted by Derek's gruff tones. "You're right, Mira. They don't deserve any mercy, not with all the undeniable proof we've compiled of their grotesque criminality over the years." The old wolf stepped forward, a satisfied glint in his eyes as he savored the disbelieving horror dawning across the snake's features. "Which is why it will be a jury of their peers, untainted by these nauseating displays of arrogance and vice, who dictates their ultimate punishment. Long, lengthy prison sentences from which hopefully they emerge having reclaimed some shred of dearly lost humanity." I faltered, anger wavering for the briefest instant as Derek pressed his advantage. "Or they can choose the path of unfettered ruination, consuming themselves with hatred until they're nothing but hollow, empty husks alongside the wreckage of everything your father strived to build." He placed a steadying hand on my shoulder, grip vice-like. "But that decision is now out of our hands. We've won, Mira. It's time to step back from the abyss and let justice and truth reclaim their rightful place." My grip slackened, digits numb as the weight of his words impacted me. Of course, Ethan would want no blood on our hands, no matter how sorely tested our resolve. This was never about vengeance or sordid reprisals, but upholding the ideals he had embodied till his last breath. I met Ava's hate-filled, incredulous glare with a look of implacable resolve. "Don't mistake this for mercy or forgiveness," I rasped with finality. "Just the inevitability of karma finally catching up to dole out its judgments." As if on cue, the courtroom doors banged open, admitting a flood of bailiffs who quickly swarmed to take custody of the vipers, slapping heavy manacles around their wrists. Nora was openly hysterical now, Leo petrified in disbelief while Ava still clung to her indignant rage like a shipwreck victim, grasping flotsam. "This isn't over, you pathetic excuse for a human being." She thundered over the cacophony, straining against her restraints. "You think this little stunt means you've won? My father's precious legacy ends here, bitch. We made sure of it." But her seething bravado was just so much hollow bravado in the face of the implacable tide sweeping her away. I simply watched impassively, finally at peace. Wrong again, I'm afraid. The words carried the quiet weight of inevitability itself. The only thing ending here today is your poisonous delusions. One by one, their hollow threats and blusterings faded into the ether alongside their departing forms. And as they were finally dragged from the court, I felt a lightness in my chest, as if a decades-old weight had finally been lifted away. Next to me, Derek arched a wry eyebrow, the ghost of a smile creasing his features for the first time in ages. "You did it, Mira. It's over." And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt my lips curve in a genuine, unfettered smile. Not of vengeance or triumph, but of the promise of redemption that lay ahead, a true legacy being born from the ashes of greed and hate. "No, Derek." I gave his hand in grateful squeeze. We did, and with Caleb at my side, we turned and walked out into the future, come what may. The soft breeze carried the scents of freshly turned earth and newly sprouted blooms, perfuming the crisp morning air with the promise of rebirth and renewal. I savored each inhalation, allowing the tranquil melodies of nature to wash over me as my fingers traced the carved letters on the granite headstone. Beloved husband, father, friend. 1968. So many memories, joyous and heartbreaking, triumphant and sorrowful, crystallized in those simple words and dates. An entire life and legacy distilled into cold, unfeeling stone, except not unfeeling, not anymore. The graveled path crunched softly behind me as Caleb approached, hands shoved into the pockets of his well-worn denim jacket, the one Ethan had gifted him on his 12th birthday only days before the fateful heart attack. My breath hitched at the sight of him, now standing eye-level to me, the same soulful hazel eyes regarding me with profound wisdom far beyond his 16 years. "You okay, Mom?" His voice was gentle, the last vestiges of adolescence still clinging to its timbre. I managed a wan smile, gesturing for him to join me. "Just remembering, is all." My fingers traced Ethan's name almost reverently as Caleb draped his arm around my shoulders, solid and reassuring. For long moments, we stood in companionable silence, united by the memories both joyous and haunting that permeated this hallowed space. Eventually, I felt composed enough to continue. "Your father was the most brilliant, passionate man I ever knew, right until the very end." I exhaled a tremulous sigh, leaning into Caleb's strength, both emotional and physical. He poured every ounce of his being into building his dreams, his legacy. And the sick part was how those he sought to include most of all were the ones who ended up trying to tear it all down. Caleb stiffened slightly, doubtlessly remembering those harrowing final days and the devastation wrought by his own flesh and blood. I pressed on, needing to exorcise these last vestiges of the poison. For months after the trial, I was consumed by hatred and anger toward them. The words tasted like ash on my tongue. It was like this all-consuming fire burning through me, torturing me with every waking moment, stoking my need for vengeance. I chanced a sidelong glance at my son's impassive features, searching for any traces of judgment or disdain. But his regard remained steady, constant, allowing me to unburden myself without fear of reprisal. At the time, it felt like the only way to cauterize the wound they had inflicted. The betrayal, the wanton devastation, like nothing else could ever let me achieve peace. My words grew softer, more reflective. But that wasn't true healing, it was just piling more hurt and anger on top of the first. Your father wouldn't have wanted that. He never let his quest drag him down into that darkness. He stayed focused on upholding the ideals and integrity that drove him. Caleb nodded slowly. He wanted to build and create, not just companies and empires, but something greater. His hand found mine, giving a reassuring squeeze. Something to protect people and give them shelter from the kinds of toxicity and hatred that fuels so much greed and wrongdoing. My throat constricted with a swell of pride at his insight and maturity. When had my bright-eyed little boy blossomed into this poised, insightful young man? I blinked back the mistiness prickling my eyes. Yes, exactly. And now it's up to us to carry that torch and continue his mission. Straightening my shoulders, I turned to fully face my son, cupping his cheek in my palm. Which is why I've decided to honor his memory by establishing the Coleman Family Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to researching and developing preventative behavioral programs for at-risk demographics. Understanding blossomed across Caleb's features, swiftly followed by that infectious grin I remembered so fondly from his childhood. "You mean?" I matched his smile with one of my own, feeling lighter than I had in years. "That's right. If there's even the slightest chance we can help other families avoid the ugliness and toxicity that plagued ours, then we owe it to your father's legacy to make that effort." For a long moment, neither of us spoke, simply basking in the prospect of authoring a new, brighter chapter free from the shackles of bitterness and anger. When Caleb finally broke the silence, his voice was thick with emotion. "He'd be proud of you, Mom, of both of us." I pulled him into a fierce embrace, feeling the contours of the man he had become pressed against me, Ethan's living legacy. "I think he would be too, sweetheart." My eyes found the carved epitaph, as if seeking benediction from beyond the veil. Because this is what it was always about, not punishing those blinded by their sins, but protecting and uplifting those still caught in darkness so they can find the light. Arm in arm, we turned and strode from the quiet peace of the Memorial Gardens, ready to face the future head-on with clear eyes and open hearts. The cycle of negativity and greed would end, and a new age of healing and positivity would beckon all those with the courage to seize it. It was time to carve a new legacy, built on the ashes of the old, one Ethan himself would be proud to call his own.